Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really powerful chapter from Leonard Ravenhill's famous book, Why Revival Tarries. We're going to break down his pretty intense argument for why he believes the modern church is, in his words, spiritually powerless. And it all starts with one very challenging question.
Right off the bat, Ravenhill doesn't give us a statement. He throws down a challenge. Now notice the question isn't, where is God? No, it's, where are the people who can command his attention? This one question really sets the stage for everything he's about to argue.
And boom, here's his entire thesis in a single sentence. For Ravenhill, real spiritual power isn't about having huge numbers or slick programs or big committees. Nope, it all boils down to one thing: a single person on their own, deep in prayer.
Okay, so let's really dig into this question. Ravenhill kicks off by quoting that ancient cry, "Where is the Lord God of Elijah?" But then he immediately flips it, turning the spotlight right back on us, on the reader, forcing us to look in the mirror for the answer.
And according to Ravenhill, the answer is both super simple and kind of convicting. God is exactly where he's always been, on his throne. The problem isn't that heaven is silent. It's that earth is missing the kind of people, the Elijahs, you could say, who actually know how to get a hold of that throne through prayer.
So what is this modern dilemma he's talking about? Well, according to Ravenhill, the root problem is a paradox. It's something that goes against pretty much everything we'd normally associate with a successful, effective organization.
I mean, just listen to that statement. It's really striking, isn't it? Ravenhill's diagnosis is that the modern church has become too good at what it does. He argues that we've become so talented, so capable, so self-sufficient that we just don't feel that desperate need for God to step in anymore. In his view, our greatest strengths have actually become our biggest weaknesses.
And this is the central tension of the whole text. Ravenhill paints a picture of a church that is organizationally brilliant, with polished services and incredibly talented people. But he argues it's missing that raw, world-changing spiritual fire of the past. There's this massive disconnect between how things look on the outside and the actual power on the inside.
So to really drive this point home, Ravenhill shifts from just talking about ideas to giving us a concrete example. He points to this one towering figure from history as the perfect model of what he thinks is missing today, the prophet Elijah.
First, Ravenhill sets the scene. And you've got to understand, Elijah's world was not a friendly place. He describes it as a nation in measureless backsliding, basically a society in total spiritual freefall, where idolatry was the norm and the worship of the true God had been almost completely stopped out.
And who does God send into this mess? Not a committee, not a task force, not an angel, but one man. Ravenhill describes Elijah as this rugged, unmovable force of nature. Just one guy who stood up all by himself against the entire national trend.
And right here, Ravenhill boils down Elijah's entire life story, all his power, all his impact, to just two words. Not he preached, not he led, but he prayed. For Ravenhill, this was the source code. This was the engine behind everything Elijah did.
So, this whole idea builds into the absolute core conflict of the chapter. Ravenhill draws this incredibly sharp line in the sand between two types of leaders he sees, the modern preacher and the biblical prophet.
And this table just lays it out so clearly. In Ravenhill's mind, the preacher is all about comfort and popularity. Their goal is to help and accommodate. But the prophet? That's a totally different story. They're a confrontational figure. Their job isn't to make people feel good. It's to shake things up, to challenge the status quo, even if it makes everybody mad. One is celebrated, the other gets hunted down.
And Ravenhill says that this kind of confrontation comes with a heavy price. He argues that anyone who is truly fired and filled with God is going to be seen as a threat. They're going to get slapped with labels like unpatriotic for daring to criticize the nation's sins, unkind for their blunt words, and unbalanced for their passion.
This leads him to this really searing critique. Ravenhill claims the modern church absolutely loves to build monuments to past reformers and martyrs. We write books about them. We praise their sacrifice. But we refuse to actually live like them. We honor their courage, but we do it from a very, very safe distance. So all of this leads us right to Ravenhill's solution. And it's not some new 10-step program or a clever strategy. Instead, it's a call to go back to the one thing he believes we've lost, the simple, powerful art of prayer. He makes this claim that this absolutely essential art is just tragically neglected. He says it's not really taught in seminaries, and because of that, Leaders graduate without knowing how to tap into this foundational source of all power. And the result? What he calls a powerless pulpit.
And Ravenhill doesn't just call for more prayer. He gets really specific about the quality of it. He argues that a lot of our praying today is just a thinly veiled attempt to give God our advice, driven by our own ambitions for ourselves or our groups, instead of just truly surrendering to His will.
He then points to Elijah's prayer on Mount Carmel as the absolute gold standard. It was short, it was bold, and it had only one goal: not for Elijah to look good, but for God's power to be revealed so that the hearts of the people would turn back to Him. It was 100% God-focused.
And this brings us to the final and maybe the most provocative takeaway of the whole chapter. Ravenhill concludes that the biggest threat to revival isn't some external enemy or some opposing ideology. The greatest obstacle, he says, is internal. It's a pulpit that has lost its fire. And his final unspoken question just kind of hangs there in the air. Who's going to answer the call to be an Elijah for this generation?